December 13th, 2013, I sat huddled in a corner of a classroom with my friends, my peers, after we heard bullets ring throughout our high school. So that day changed me. It changed everyone in that building, and more importantly, it changed our community. Now, unfortunately, people all across the country, and I'm certain even a few people in this room, knows what I'm talking about when I say it's hard to sometimes be a survivor of a shooting. It's hard to say how that affects you. So, in 2017 alone, there was a mass shooting for every single day of the year. And in 2019, as of February 28th, there's been 49 mass shootings. And I guarantee you that that number has increased because I counted it last week. So the criteria for a mass shooting, there is no standard definition, there is no legal, nothing. It depends. And that really messes up trying to get data and to evaluate how common this is happening and to find a standard data set. But the U.S. Congressional Research Service defines a public mass shooting as an instance where 4 people are fatally killed in one location indiscriminately. So according to this definition, my shooting won't really count and won't be evaluated and looked at. And I honestly I get embarrassed to say that I survived a shooting. Because when I tell people that I lost 2 classmates that day, 2 children, their first responses are generally something along the lines of, "That's horrible, but at least it's not that bad." We live in a time where I feel like my own shooting was not that bad. There wasn't dozens of fatalities. It wasn't that big. Let that sit. So, a couple of years later, I'm sitting here in my political science class, and my professor gives us one prompt. That's it. He says, come up with one solution to mass shootings that everybody agrees on. So the room erupts. It erupts into tons of arguments, people debating. This is the future minds of tomorrow, the future policymakers and politicians. And that day, we didn't come up with one solution to put on the board. I sat there and I listened, and I realized that our classroom reflected a bigger problem in our country, is that the language we used was very divisive. We were arguing along party lines and political ideologies to the point where we couldn't compromise on anything. And that exact moment is where the B.E.A.S.T was born. The B.E.A.S.T stands for Bipartisan Existential Accessibility Societal Theory, and it is encompassing the 3 leading factors so I believe are causing mass shootings. Now, as you see here, it is not one factor over the others. It is equally all 3. It is a combination. So the past year, I've been evaluating data and researching, and like I said, it's hard. The numbers are not consistent. But I have been able to evaluate trends that make me certain that these are the 3 areas of focus. Now, the B.E.A.S.T is here to change the discourse, the language that we use. This is the most important part of the theory. Language we use to talk about the issue so it's not so divisive. We need to reframe it as an American issue, because America is the only developed nation in the world that is experiencing an epidemic of mass shootings. It needs to stop being so polarized. So quick disclaimer here, because I've presented this before, and the first reactions I sometimes get are, so how are you going to take our guns away? To be clear, that's not what the B.E.A.S.T is about, and that's not what I'm here to do. But we do need to address guns because we don't have a mass stabbing epidemic, we have a mass shooting epidemic. And the undeniable fact is that when people choose to kill large amounts of other people in this country, they're choosing guns. So yeah, we gotta address it. So remember, each prong in itself could lead to its very own TED Talk. There's a lot of information on all of them. I'm going to break it down very quickly and kind of focus on the parts that I want everyone to take away with them today. Societal influences is reflecting what about our society is causing us to have a problem of mass shootings. It could be a lot of things. I've highlighted things from the mass military presence in our country, the industrial complex that we are built on, the foundations of guns and gun rights, from the education system. We have a school shooting problem. There's something about our education system that's making students feel like they have to take a gun to school. To the media and its desensitizing influences, the fact that they're so common that they don't make the first page anymore, to there's a lot, and I could really go on. But most importantly, I want to talk about is the who. Now, when we talk about mass shootings, I hear words like new and this emerging problem in your generation. But I want to point out and acknowledge that mass shootings are as old as this country itself. They've always been happening. It's just before 1980, they disproportionately affected marginalized communities like Native Americans and African Americans. But after 1980, they started to affect all of us. So another factor that has become undeniable in all the data and all the trends I've looked at, one trend that has remained consistent is that it's males between the ages of 18 and 49 that are more often than not the perpetrators. Now, Dew Grant, he is the leading researcher on mass shootings. He wrote a book called Mass Murder in the U.S., evaluating 184 mass shootings since 1900. Yeah, that's the title. But he was able to point out a trend that out of the 184 mass shootings fitting to the same criteria, 4 or more, 63% of those were done by non-Hispanic white males. Now, considering that this demographic only makes up about 31% of our population, this is disproportionate. And we need to start asking why. What about our society is causing this very particular demographic to do such acts of violence? A graph. Shows the same thing that I said. Next, I kind of put them together because I think it's easier to think of mental health and accessibility. Like I said, they're very tightly bound. So I want to start by saying we must be careful, and I implore that we don't link mental illness with mass shootings and mass acts of violence. Because people with mental illness are 3 times as likely to actually be victims of violence than they are perpetrators. And there's basically no data, nothing substantial that can link mental illness with mass shootings. So instead, I ask that instead of looking at this as a sickness in the individual, we look at this as a sickness in our system. When we talk about mental health and illness, we need to focus on the fact that it is society, that 4 million Americans as of 2008 remain uninsured. That's 15.7% of our demographic. When people don't have access to these things, they're going to use what they got. We live in a country that gives people more access to guns than mental health care resources. So I know after my shooting, we all were kind of messed up. I was messed up. But I was lucky enough to live in an area and go to a school that could provide students with extra counseling, extra mental health resources, parents that could afford to do this for their children, because I know that this is not a financially viable option for everybody. And that's part of the problem. Mass shootings as an epidemic, part of the power is they are making us all sicker as a nation. It's injecting fear, tension, and anxiety into us as a people. When you're too afraid to send your children to school, when you're too afraid to go to the grocery store, to go to concerts, movie theaters, and even church, that is affecting our mental. and we have to provide people with resources. I have it like a pyramid because by the time we get through all the societal influences and make it to the point where people need to focus on mental health care, that's when it gets an accessibility problem. Last, I talk about existential. So after my shooting, they told us the likelihood that you will go through something like this again it's unlikely. It probably won't happen again. And I lived in this comfort. I let this comfort carry me selfishly. I thought, especially as more shootings started to occur and they started to get worse, I thought, at least it's not going to happen to me again. Until I heard the story of Telemachus Orphanos. He's a man that survived the Las Vegas shooting, one of the deadliest shootings in recent history, only to die less than a year later in the Thousand Oaks shooting. This rocked my world. All of a sudden, the impossibles, the unlikelies became false. This is a reality that we all need to deal with. So existential, by all these definitions, the B.E.A.S.T applies, whether it's affirming and implying the existence of the things. And remember, mass shootings are symptoms of a larger disease, and we don't know what that disease is. But the B.E.A.S.T needs to affirm its existence before we can address it. Philosophy, it's concerning existence, especially human existence. This threatens everything. This threatens all of us. I don't see how that can apply anymore. And then lastly, existence precedes our essence. Our essence as a people, as a country of the brave and the strong, is this. We have now become a people that allows politics to keep us from making compromises that might save people's lives. Change the way you speak. Change the way we approach this problem because we have to do it together. And if we don't start there, then we're not going to start at all. We must not let politics separate us on issues of humanity. We have to let issues of humanity unite us in our politics. And that's what the B.E.A.S.T is going to do. Thank you.